your classmates, I don't know, the representatives of your class wanted me to do a presentation on doing ethnography or the relevance of ethnography during the time of a COVID-19 pandemic. So I framed the title as Doing Ethnographic Research During the COVID-19 Pandemic. But before I could start on discussing that, of course, I would like to discuss what ethnography is in the traditional sense, its tools, and then proceed to how it is being implemented at present. Okay, so since I am an anthropologist, in particular a cultural anthropologist, let me first locate where ethnography is. Because one of the questions that I received from your classmates is, what is the difference between anthropology and ethnography? So this sets the context. So broadly speaking, anthropology is the study of human beings. And you will see in this picture, Franz Boas, who is the father of modern anthropology. He is an American anthropologist. And according to Boas, there are four fields of anthropology. And these are biological anthropology, also known as physical anthropology, social cultural anthropology, also known as ethnology, archaeology, and then linguistic anthropology. So ethnography is located in number two, social cultural anthropology, also known as ethnology. So ethnology is the study of cultures because all human beings have or possess cultures. Um, okay, so the overarching theme in ethnology as well as in the three other branches of anthropology, including biological anthropology, linguistic anthropology, and archaeology, is the concept of culture because only humans have culture. Animals, yes, they have behavior, but their belief systems, their knowledge, their practices cannot be passed on from generation to generation, what we call as culture. So culture, as defined by Sir Edward Burnett Tylor way back in 1871, he said that culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, arts, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. Okay, so let us look at the keywords. Man, because only humans have culture. Society, because we're not interested in individual behavior or individual knowledge. What we are interested in is what is shared across different societies. So a society is a group of people, usually territorially bounded, such as in the case of Philippine society. Now, uh, acquired is another keyword because we are not born having culture. We learn culture from our parents, from our elders, from our siblings and other relatives, from our peers, classmates, from the school, from the church, from government. So it is not innate because something that is innate is nature, but something that is acquired and therefore cultural. Now, what consists of culture is it's a very complex whole, including these words mentioned here: knowledge, belief, arts, morals. So anything that is man made is cultural. Anything that is not man made is natural. Another definition comes from a textbook in anthropology. This is from Ember, and Peregrine, where they said that culture refers to the set of learned behaviors, beliefs, attitudes, values, and ideals that are characteristic of a particular society or population. So again, the word learned, in Taylor's definition, he used acquired because, for example, let me give you an example. Feeding or what to eat is something biological. Because we are animals, we rely on external sources of food. But what we eat, how many times a day we eat, is something that is cultural. So when the baby gets hungry, so the mother will uh, feed the baby by using breast milk or uh, milk from a bottle. But as the child grows up, the parents teach the child when to eat and when not to eat. So parents will say, anak, kakakain mo lang. Bakit nagme-merienda ka na naman? Okay? O kaya, mawawalan ka ng gana, maghintay ka ng tanghalian bago kumain. So it is something that is imposed on us. Now, Ember, and Peregrine distinguished society from population because, as I mentioned a while ago, society is territorially defined. Philippine society, bounded by, we're located in Philippine archipelago. But there are certain groups of people without any territorial boundaries, such as in the case of nomadic hunters and gatherers. So we just call them as a group or a population. Okay, so now what is ethnography? We defined anthropology. We know that ethnology is a branch of anthropology. Now, ethnography is a description of a society's customary behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes. So it is a descriptive account about a particular culture. So anthropologists want to study culture, and how they do that is to describe that culture. Another definition, which comes from Ellen, says that ethnography refers to empirical accounts of the culture and social organization of particular human populations. Usually, an ethnological study is a comparative study. We know that, for example, the concepts of marriage is something and family is something universal among humankind because we have compared and contrasted different cultures. But an ethnography is a one culture study. It is a descriptive account about a particular culture. So what is shown in the picture on the right is one of my latest publications. It's just a short monograph published this year during the pandemic. The title is Pagkilala sa mga magpapalayok, ang kaso ng palayukan sa Pasig. So I did participant observation as a method of research among potters in Pasig City. And I did this study from 2009 up to 2019. So I've been coming back and forth to pottery making households in Pasig City to produce this output. Okay. Let me give you other examples of Philippine ethnographies. Here are four examples. Of course, there is a lot. One is sacrifice and sharing in Philippine Highlands about the Mangyans of Mindoro by Thomas Gibson. Maduvu Social Organization by E. Arsenio Manuel. Power and Intimacy in the Christian Philippines by Fenella Canel, and Slum as a Way of Life by F. Lando Hocano. Now, why did I choose these four examples? Because I wanted to show that Philippine ethnographies may be written by Filipinos, such as Dr. Hocano and Dr. Manuel, as well as foreigners who have studied the Philippines, such as Gibson and Canel. Also, ethnographies may be studies about cultures in the highlands, such as among the Manuvu of Mount Apo and the Mangyans of Mindoro, as well as in the lowlands and urban areas, such as the study of Canel and Slum as a Way of Life by Dr. Hocano. So everything can be studied using an ethnographic approach. And later in this lecture, I will uh, tell you my thoughts about how to do research, especially now that we're on lockdown. While you're at home, how could you do ethnography? Okay, so we have to define, or the anthropologist doing the ethnography has to define the unit of study. What area or group does he or she intend to study? Usually, an ethnographic research or an ethnography studies one particular community, such as I studied Pasig City. That's a community. However, an ethnography may be just a section of a community, such as a neighborhood, a street or alley, such as uh, there are foreign ethnographies studying about youth gangs in particular streets in Boston, for example. Another unit of study may be a particular subculture or a subset of a culture, such as an ethnographic study of gays or lesbians, a study about religious cults, about student activists. I mentioned a youth gang, etc. So it doesn't have to be the whole society. It really depends on the particular area of interest of the anthropologist and for what purpose is this being done. So if it is a demonstration of a particular culture, so it should be an intensive study about that particular segment of a society. Now, in the traditional past, there are ethnographies that dealt with a broader culture area or the study of a particular ethnic group, such as ethnography of the Ifugaos, ethnography of the Aita, ethnography of the Tausug of Sulu. In the past, that was possible because uh, way before globalization, communities were relatively homogeneous. That means if you go to one community of that particular ethnic group, the situation in the adjacent or nearby communities will more likely be the same. However, at present, even a very, very small community is already very, very heterogeneous. There are variations of practices, what they eat, what time they sleep, what do they watch on TV, what are their preferences as to what they wear. There is wide variation. So it is almost impossible to do an ethnographic study of a bigger culture area right now, except if it is a very, very and isolated community with a very small population. So in the picture, this is in an urban setting. This is Barangay Old Capital Site in Quezon City. This is still part of the University of the Philippines, Diliman. And you will be surprised that there are informal settlers within the university. And this is one area where my students may go to do studies uh, when we were still at a face-to-face setting. Okay, now how do we do ethnographic research? There are many tools that we can use, but the number one tool used by ethnographers and now borrowed by other social scientists, not just anthropologists, but also sociologists, demographers, economists, political scientists, is the method of participant observation. So this method originally was invented within anthropology, but now borrowed by different social science disciplines. So participant observation is a method of study in which outsiders or the researcher immerse themselves in family and village life and observe and participate in daily activities. It involves intense social interaction with people in their own setting. That means the setting of the community that you want to study. So in this picture, I am the person raising my two hands. We were dancing in a kanyao. The person in front of me was my former student, because this is the UP Anthropology Field School that was conducted in Bakun, Benguet during school year 2005 and 2006. Because in UP, in our anthropology department, we send students to the field. In the past, for one whole semester, but now because there are more and more students, only during the summertime, which is about 1 month. So before it was 3 months or more. So it was really an intensive study. That's why the adjective intense, because you stay there for a long period of time. Why a long period of time? Because you have to see and observe day-to-day life. If you just went to the field for a short period of time, in other words, nakisawsaw ka lang, what you will observe is a superficial behavior. Especially in the Philippine setting, meron tayong ugaling pangbisita versus hindi na bisita. So pag bisita, the community members will provide you with the best food that they have. They will even offer their beds for you to sleep on. But if you stay longer, such as for 6 months or for 1 year, buwisita ka na. Ano? So pag sinabi mo, Manang, hindi pa ba tayo kakain? Sasabihin ni Manang, ang tagal-tagal mo na rito, hindi mo pa alam saan kukunin ang pagkain. Now, many foreigners thought that this is ningas kugon. Ay, mga Pilipino, mabait lang sa simula. Later, hindi na. But actually, it was a transcendence of relationship. Dati, you are treated as somebody else. But now, you are part of the family. And this is what we want to observe. We want to observe both the ideal as well as the real practice. So what people eat, you eat. What people do if they go to the fields and plant and harvest, then you should join them as well. So here are possible approaches in doing participant observation. Remember, there are two parts in it: participating in day-to-day life, but without forgetting doing systematic observations at the same time and documenting them. So these are just guides. First, plan your fieldwork, draw up a research framework, select and contact a community, get permission for a village study, let the community know how long you intend to stay. So these things should be clear, both for you and for the community members. Because maybe the community thought that you will just be staying there for 3 days without them realizing that you're staying there almost forever. And then they will resent it. So that should be transparent enough. Okay? Permission from the barangay, permission from the authorities, permission from the villagers themselves. This permission should be explicit as to how you want to go on with your research, what do you want to study, etc. There should be no hidden agendas. Everything, all your cards should be laid on the table. The second step is to move into the village and establish rapport. Sa Filipino, nakikibagay, nakikipagkapwa. So you don't go to the community and then immediately interview them. So sa simula, nakikipag-inuman ka muna, nakikilaba ka sa ilog, nakikikwentuhan, nakikichismis to establish rapport. Third, take interest in the culture, their daily life, and special events. If they have a town fiesta, then you should join that fiesta. Hindi mo pwedeng sabihin, hindi pwede eh, kasi Catholic practice yan eh, iglesia ako, bawal sa amin yan. Hindi pwede. You have to transcend uh, your uh, your own limitations because that is the only way for you to understand people's behavior and practices. Learn through observation and by talking to people. Hindi lang observe ng observe, dapat din magtatanong sa mga tao. Manang, nakita ko ganito yung dance steps nyo. Bakit ano ang meaning nun? Yan kasi ay ganito, ganyan. So, interviewing is very much a part of participant observation. Eat what the people eat and live as they live. Help in daily activities and participate in special events. Hindi pwede yung nakikipamahay ka and then may dala-dala kang bottled water. Pag nag-offer sila ng tap water, ay, that's so kadiri, manang, I don't drink that. Hindi po pwede. Dapat you establish rapport, you try your best to do what they do. Of course, if there are dietary prohibitions, you could just be transparent about it. Manang, masarap yung pagkain na yan. Unfortunately, meron akong problem with my stomach. So the doctor advised me. So you could tell them about it. People will understand your limitations. Pero wag because you are judgmental that that's not food. I don't eat that. Kahit tikim, subukan. Take mental notes when you are with people. Transcribe these mental notes when you are alone. Check your notes regularly. Look for entries which need clarification and follow up. Bakit mental notes? Because if there's an activity and you're jotting down notes, people will be conscious of what they're doing. Ay, mali yata yung steps natin. It should be this way. So, alalahanin lang mentally. But once you get home, you write down your notes at night. And in case you forgot something, you could validate it the next day or later. You could ask them, I missed the term that was used during that ritual. What do you call that ritual? And then that's when you could write notes. Then depart in a way that is appropriate to the culture of the study community. Hindi pwedeng dahil tapos ka na, umalis ka na lang sa community. There should be pagpapaalam, and then, as a matter of fact, there should be community validation about your output. Did I get it right when I did my study that these are the things that I was able to observe. So in the picture, this was my anthropology class field trip. This is not a field school. This is a very short engagement in Banawe, Ifugao. So this is just an exercise for students on how to do ethnography. So that's me with the cap, and the three are my students. I don't know if you recognize one of my students on the left. That's Ted Cruz, one of your teachers, who was my former student, one of my brightest students. Okay, okay. Uh, Next. So as I mentioned, interviewing is part of doing ethnographies. So I won't read this anymore. I know you know what interviewing is. From the picture, you will see that's me interviewing a dumagat in Doña Remedios Trinidad in Bulacan. This is a particular study. Actually, it's applied research. There is a quarry project in that area, and we wanted to look at the potential impact of that quarry in that particular community. And there are dumagats among Tagalogs living in the area. So I was interviewing them. Now, interviews may be structured or unstructured, formal or informal. So you decide which one you have to use. If it is a very short stay, it would be better to be structured and formal so that you don't miss a thing. But if it's a longer stay, you could use unstructured and or combination of both, because there is an advantage of less formal methods, because people will say openly what they want to say. Now, of course, there are three requirements. There should be accessibility. Physical accessibility is one, but also social accessibility. If people don't want to talk with you, then you cannot get anything from them. There should be cognition. People should realize or know what you intend to study. Hindi pwedeng usap kayo ng usap and then hindi naman pala yun ang gusto mong makuha. Then there should be motivation. Uh, they want to participate in the research because it is also something that is beneficial to them. If they are not motivated, then they will give you wrong information. Now, how do we validate the reliability of this data? We have to do triangulation. That means you don't rely on only one informant, but you get several informants and cross-check the data that you were able to gather. So informants may be casual informants or key informants. A casual informant is anyone in the community because he or she can give generalized knowledge. A key informant can provide you specialized knowledge. So if he is a warrior, he could talk about how to conduct warfare. So in this case, this was my field work in Papua, but not in Papua New Guinea. This is Papua province of Indonesia, beside Papua New Guinea. And the man beside me is an Amongne warrior. You will see what he's wearing. This is the koteka or the penis sheath. Ano to? Dried na upo, which acts as their underwear. So the penis is inserted inside and then tied with a string. I tried it, but it was very difficult. And of course, I won't show you the picture of me wearing koteka. Okay. So a key informant should be credible, accessible, willing to talk, and having great depth of knowledge about that particular area. Now, after gathering so many data, for example, you've been there for 3 months, how do you analyze the data? We have to look for the patterns. Patterns of culture refer to the socially defined limits within which individual variation takes place. Within a community, yes, there is a variation of practices, but there are certain practices that they do not do because they don't recognize it as part of their culture. So, for example, when we talk about Philippine society, infanticide or the killing of infants is beyond the limits. No Filipino in his right mind would say, ay, pinatay niya ang anak niya, ang galing, Pinoy na Pinoy. You know? Everyone will say, that's non-Filipino. So, but within, how do we take care of our babies? There is variation. And patterns may be ideal, yung what people ought to do, or real, which is observable. Both types should be observed because we could only understand the real pattern on the basis of our understanding of the ideal pattern. Because the real pattern is either conformity or deviation from the ideal pattern. There are also 5 categories of cultural patterns: compulsory, preferred, typical, alternative, and restricted. All of this we try to capture. Compulsory is when culture allows only one type of behavior in a given setting. Kaya nga compulsory. In Philippine society, if you commit murder, then there's capital punishment. There is no other way. Preferred pattern is when you could do several types of behavior, but one type is more valued than others. So for example, ano bang preferred? If you go to a French fine dining restaurant, the preferred way of dining is with a knife and fork. Of course, you may order a spoon, but that is, there's certain etiquette within French fine dining. Typical pattern is based on statistical frequencies. It is not on the basis of value judgment. Wala lang. It just happens that certain things are more typical, such as a typical Filipino eats kanin at ulam. We know that for a fact. Merong kumakain ng sandwiches, may kumakain ng pasta, they are still Filipinos, but statistically, kanin at ulam ang kinakain. Alternative is when there is no difference in value or frequency. Restricted pattern is when certain types of behavior are allowed for some but not for others. For example, pwede sa women but not for men. Pwede sa gays but not for straight. Pwede sa mga kapatid sa iglesia pero hindi sa ibang relihiyon, etc. etc. Okay. These are possible problem areas. Language differences. Of course, you have to learn a language that is different from you. Then the presence of cultural gatekeepers. Merong mga nagmamarunong sa community, sasabihin nila, wag mo na interviewin yun kasi kaya ko namang sagutin yan. Front stage versus backdoor behavior. Front stage, they show you the best. But behind your back, it is a different case. So parang ideal and the real yun. Ethnocentric views, because their practices are different, we should be on guard as to our own biases. Yung, ay, napaka-savage nila, ay, napaka-uneducated nila. Ano? Sa words nga ng Itbulaga, judgmental. Bawal ang judgmental. Hindi po pwede sa ethnography yun. Stereotype framing. The concept is like a picture. So how do you depict that particular culture Of course, I said there are variations of practices. Now, there is a tendency, but that if you only show certain types, outsiders may interpret that that is how the people are because you did not show them variation of practices. So we want to prevent stereotyping. So, for example, hunters and gatherers, some of them live in makeshift houses, but others live in permanent houses. So we have to show both. So this is my field work in the Solomon Islands in the Pacific way back in 2011. Of course, one problem, that's why I'm showing it here, is language differences. The language that they use, of course, they have their native languages, so many languages. But the lingua franca is pidgin, pidgin English. So it's like our Carabao English, and it is very very easy to learn. So later I learned speaking. They call it talk pisin or pidgin talk because you just think about English and then translating it uh, in their language. Other considerations will be logistical and financial requirements. How can you do a long-term research if you have very limited funds? Time constraints, especially if you're just a student. Uh, for example, when I was still studying and finishing my dissertation, my area of research is in Kalinga province in the Cordillera. So I just went there during semestral breaks and summer and Christmas breaks. So this is a limitation that I have, and I am explicit in my dissertation research that that was my limitation. Reliability of information, I said you have to triangulate not just different informants, but also different methods of research. Ethical concerns. For example, do we do studies that people don't like us to study? When I did research among the Agta of Palanan Isabela, this is a nomadic group in Palanan Isabela, we sought their permission. But after we finished the study, so we fed back to them the results of our findings to validate whether we got it correctly or not. And the AGTA informant said, yes, sir, everything is correct. However, please don't write about our medicinal plants because we don't want outsiders to know about our secrets. So parang, ay sayang, ni-research ko pa, tapos bawal naman palang isulat. So that should have been explicit from the start. And we must follow their rules because the knowledge comes from them. So in this picture, this is my field work in New Caledonia. New Caledonia is a French overseas province in the Pacific. So it is not a colony, but it is a province of France, but near Australia, not in Europe. Okay? A former colony. Fortunately, when I was at the undergrad level in the University of the Philippines, we were required to take up foreign language electives. And the electives that I took were French 10 and 11. So fortunately, I was able to do interviews using my rudimentary French. Okay, let's proceed to COVID-19. But how can we do ethnography right now when we cannot go outside of our homes? How can we go to the field? Okay. So before answering that, it is important first to realize why it is relevant to do ethnographic research even during the COVID-19 pandemic. First of all, the COVID-19 pandemic is not just a medical issue, but it is also a social cultural issue. Remember that the spread of the virus is heightened because of specific types of behavior. You will hear from our government saying, ay kasi pasaway ang mga tao, kaya sila nagkakahawa-hawa. So this is behavioral and therefore cultural. However, government officials just reprimand people. They tell people to do this and not to do this without understanding why people do the way they do. Bakit ba sila pasaway to begin with? Okay? So, here are some examples of some Filipino behavior which I think is rooted in Filipino social intimacy. That is why we behave the way we do. First is being family-oriented. So, lagi tayong kasama sa pamilya. Dahil family-oriented din, malalaking pamilya ang pinag-uusapan natin. Okay? Sama-samang kumakain kasama ng parents and siblings. There is preference for group activity versus individual activity. Remember, when we were on a face-to-face setting, pag kumakain kayo ng mag-isa sa table, ano sasabihin ng classmates nyo? Siguro may problema yun. Siguro nag-break sila ng boyfriend niya, kaya siya nag-iisa. Kasi mga Filipinos, laging they huddle in groups. Because from here we get affection and love from our peers. Ang mga nag-iisa sa atin, parang mga deviants. Okay? Close social proxemics. Ito yung touching culture ng mga Pilipino. Yung nag-aakbayan, nag-holding hands, nagkikilitian, nagsusundutan, nag-hug, nagbebeso-beso. Not all cultures are like that. If you do that to Americans, Americans will say, bro, are you gay? Why are you holding me? Okay? So, yun, ang isang factor din. Then, iba sinasabi ng government, stay at home, wag pagala-gala. But in traditional Filipino society, the house is merely a sleeping place. Sa buong araw, pag talagang nasa labas kayo, nasa silong, nakahilata sa kalsada, actually, among the Maranao, the term for house is torogan. Kasi tulugan siya. Ang bahay, yung traditional house, not the modern house, is just a single room, tabi-tabi sa sahig, sa banig when people sleep. Sa silong, dyan ang tambayan, not just my family members, but including friends and neighbors. So, the government officials do not understand people's worldviews and practices. Now, the term habitus means siguro habit. We do the things that we do out of force of habit. Nakaugalian na eh. Without thinking about it, this is what we do. So yun yung tinatawag na habitus. And it is important for planners, including those in government, those in DOH, to understand that policies, programs, and practices should build upon existing cultures of people. So how do we do participant observation in a pandemic setting? Here are possibilities. So I'm saying possibilities because, to be honest, I have not done it right now because I'm doing other things during this pandemic, such as conducting online classes, writing reports. But if I were to do ethnographic research right now, here are some possibilities. First is, if there is work from home, then it's possible to do field work from home or at home, doing observation within the home setting. One exercise that I gave to my anthropology students right now is, for one whole week, they make a diary. What are people in the household doing every day? Observe what everyone is doing. Write down notes. And based on it, look at the patterns. So, where are the places at home where they huddle? Is it at the sala or the living room? Or is it at the dining room? Or is it at the sleeping area? Of course, there will be variations of practices, but if you collect several ethnographies or diaries, you will see the patterns. Second is conducting online interviews. What we're doing right now, maybe you're interviewing me, and when we have an open forum. Third is systematic watching of CCTV footages, and we have a lot coming from the MMDA, coming from the local government, coming from private companies. But right now, CCTV cameras are mainly for traffic, mainly for security. We could also use this to observe people. So what does the anthropologist do? Just watch the taped videos and look at the patterns. When they go to the market, where do they go? What do they buy? Is it men or women doing the errands? Or is it the elders or the children? So once we see the patterns, we could come up with recommendations. And lastly, monitoring social media posts. So you could monitor what your friends are doing. Di ba? Merong daily post sila sa IG. So you will know, this is how he or she copes with a pandemic. So we see coping mechanisms of people. We see their pains and sufferings. Marami nagpo-post sa social media, ay gusto ko nang mag-suicide. I can't take it anymore because this pandemic is too stressful. So we see uh, patterns of behavior through social media posts. Of course, word of caution, we have to discern whether that is real or imagined. Kasi, di ba, may mga alter, meron ding mga fake news. So, kailangan ding ma-discern alin yung totoo at hindi. So, I think this is my second to the last slide. Are Filipinos really pasaway? I beg to disagree. Okay. My answer is, how can Filipinos observe social distancing in overcrowded poor communities? And most of our communities are like this. Now I'm putting social distancing in quotes because actually we anthropologists and sociologists, we don't like the term because actually that's physical distancing. Because in this time of pandemic, we should actually be socially close to each other, socially connected, but physically distant. Ayaw natin ng nag-iisa. Ayaw natin ng loner. Connected, yes, through social media, through the mobile phone. But that's the term being used by government, so we're using it. How can social distancing be practiced at home? Because the government is saying Even when you're at home, you should be apart from one another. When the household space is very small and family members have to sleep beside each other on the floor, how can people practice regular washing of hands when there is no adequate supply of water? How can we ask people to stay at home when they do not have food at home? Ako, I go out of the house once a week because I have to go to the grocery and buy my supplies. But how about people who live on a day-to-day basis? They have to go outside of the house every day and then you reprimand them. They go to community pantries and then you reprimand them. So the problem is not with people, but with the social structures that we have created. There has to be a reform in these structures. Lastly, how can we ask people to follow IATF protocols when they see that government officials themselves violate these protocols? Bawal ang gatherings and you see the police chief having a manyanita party. Dapat naka-face mask and you see the presidential spokesperson not having a face mask or the president not having face mask and even telling people I'm not comfortable wearing them. So there should be role models and those that are implementing such policies should be the role models in this situation. In conclusion, ethnography is an important tool in providing qualitative data to better understand people's practices and behavior. We cannot solely rely, sorry, that this is typographical. We cannot solely rely, there's a word missing, on quantitative data because quantitative data by themselves cannot be explained. So if we have statistics saying this number of people died, yes, we know that there is a big problem, but it doesn't tell us the story. Why did they die? We could get that from qualitative information through interviews of relatives, through ethnographic research. Data from ethnographic research are important inputs in the development and implementation of policies, programs, and plans of action. So there is an applied component of ethnography. This is not research for academic purposes only, but it is an input to policy making. Lastly, all types of applied research, including ethnographic research, because there are other types of researches, should include socio-cultural considerations. So not just medical considerations, not just engineering considerations, not just ano pa ba, uh, public works considerations, because we are talking about people and therefore social science is very important. And this is where, of course, you as future social scientists can contribute a lot. So with this, thank you very much for listening. If we still have time for the open forum, it's very welcome. But if there is very limited time, you could email me at ntcastro1 at up.edu.ph. You could also like and subscribe my YouTube channel. Look for Nestor Castro. Thank you very much.